Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. It's a joy to participate. Did so last year as well. I'm having a little trouble finding my... It's always good to start off with a thank you, which is up on the screen, but... Thank you. What I would like to do is speak to some aspects of affordable cancer care. It's a global issue of enormous dimension. Mark just sort of reviewed quite comprehensively many of the elements within it, and I'm going to actually focus on some more narrow dimensions that I think are at least more manageable, I hope measurable, and I'm convinced actionable. It's hard not to be astonished at the impact that growing healthcare costs are having, not just on the national budget as a global issue, but on our individual patients. And Scott Ramsey and his group, among quite a few others, have documented a high degree of financial stress that occurs in association with healthcare issues per se and cancer in particular. The enormous personal level of bankruptcy that seems to occur in association with treatment of what we think of as readily available, reasonably effective treatment for this disease. So it's an astonishing problem of magnitude that is almost unheard of to our patients, let alone society. This graph you may or may not have seen before, and it's not particular to cancer, but cancer is certainly well embedded in the concept. And it depicts, as you can see, a number of countries considered developed nations within the world, per capita spending on healthcare, and average life expectancy. And here's the US of A, which is by no means in the front of the pack in this regard. Although I will fully admit that many of us, those among the financially reasonably well off or quite well off, probably have a lot different data in terms of life expectancy than does the whole. But look at the per capita spending. It's astonishing. And I'm sure that cancer fits mightily into this. Now, because what I'm going to speak about in the next few slides has really been generated as an initiative I've had the good fortune to lead for the American Society of Clinical Oncology, I'd like to say that we at ASCO established a task force, once called On the Cost of Cancer Care, but now renamed The Value in Cancer Care, and operated on a premise that physicians need to own more of this problem than we have historically done. In a very nice overview of the costs of cancer care in the developed parts of the world, largely Europe and the United States, a very nice summary provided in Lancet Oncology 2011 identified areas, as you can see here, where there are aspects of the care and cost equation that are really in the physician's wheelhouse. Therapies that have virtually no benefit, unclear benefit, or marginal benefit occupy a very substantial piece of that pie that the physician has control of. There are certainly some therapies that patients will refuse, perhaps because of toxicity, medical or financial, and duplicated services, again, which is an enormous downstream effect of the disjointed systems of care that we currently have. The task force set out initially and published a guidance statement documenting what we felt were drivers of cost. Not necessarily to mention every last one of them, but to emphasize a few, drug costs being one that to be highlighted, new technologies, which we're all aware of, driving, at last year's meeting, there were discussions about robotic surgery, proton beam therapy, enormously interesting, compelling drugs, the cost of which is profound to patient and society. We certainly identified a system or lack of an integrated healthcare system or a coherent system that is characterized by misaligned incentives for all concerned. The task force undertook a mandate to pursue education, professional education, and patient-directed education, and has actually done a number of things, ranging from cancer.net, which is ASCO's patient-oriented website, speaking about cancer care and financial issues. The task force has embraced and is in the process of evolving policy positions towards improving care. But we felt a need to focus on an action item or series of action items on that which is in the oncologist's control. And in particular, felt it was critical for us to identify things that we do as doctors that really don't add to the value equation with respect to our patients. This was the sort of the dialogue within the task force, which was formed about 5 or so years ago. And it basically resonated with what was published in the New England Journal of Medicine a year or two later, when Howard Brody basically challenged organized medicine. This was his initial comments were really made when the Affordable Care Act was under a great duress in, as if it isn't already, or as if it's still, but it was a subject of phenomenal debate. And he pointed out that many constituents or stakeholders had really come forward with suggestions for how they might contribute to a redefined approach to healthcare, lamenting that that organized medicine per se, specialty by specialty, really hadn't done that much. And his suggestion was simple, straightforward, and obvious. Most of us know that there are so many things we currently do that are being done for reasons that are other than making that patient in front of us a lot better. And the assumption is that we would be saving lots and lots of money across the medical spectrum if we simply identified those things and put them to a halt. And that really became the so-called Choosing Wisely campaign that ASCO and others embraced. Now, you'll remember that Choosing Wisely is actually sort of the rubric for a collaboration between the American Board of Internal Medicine Foundation and Consumer Reports. The assumption being that if societies, medical societies, can identify that which does not add value and use those as talking points with our patients, that there will be a lot less unnecessary care. And in fact, we'll have an educated consumer who will buy into it with us. Well, we came up with a list of 5 practices that are pretty common in the oncology universe that could be dispensed with without compromising a patient's care and likely would save a lot of money. It seemed to have a lot of traction, particularly with the ABIM, and I would say with my colleagues in the oncology community. And as a result, we did it once again. So we came up with a 6 through 10, which was just published October 28th, and a paper supporting each of these is in the JCO last year, and one just electronically published a few days ago. And rather than recount every one of them, because time is short, looks like it's very short, and I apologize for going over. I just wanted to sort of outline the themes because they kind of, in a way, dovetail with my policy suggestions. But first off, we talk about drugs, whether they are the recommended utilization of single versus combination chemotherapy in instances where there really is no clear survival benefit for using combinations other than greater toxicity and more cost. Antiemetics, which are fabulously effective and sometimes fabulously expensive. Well worth it in the right situation, not worth it in the wrong clinical or unneeded situation. And the same goes for cytokines. We identified imaging practices in low-risk patients as completely unnecessary for the vast majority of patients. And the same goes for surveillance of patients already treated with curative intent. There's no good data that following those patients in particular with detailed screening biochemically or radiographically, helps us keep them better, keep them in better health. And lastly, we tried to tackle end-of-life care, advising oncologists when to make the transition between care that is cancer-directed and care that isn't. There is an enormous amount of expense here. There's also an enormous amount of quality implication in terms of how best to humanely care for somebody at this critical juncture in life. Well, to get where we need to have lots of education of the public and the professional community, but we really need a system that helps us define care that we would say is high value. So my 3 policy goals, the first 2 are relatively narrow, but they address areas that are getting increasing attention, and that is, it reflects the enormous and rapidly rising cost of novel therapies for cancer. We heard of some of the magical science that's coming forth. Some of it is quite effective, and some of it is minimally or modestly effective, but there's no price discriminant or value discriminant, as far as I can tell, in almost any of it. And I think that needs serious attention, if it's at all possible to give it there. We need to put some degree of market force at work in terms of, I think, negotiating a cost for these drugs. I realize that that represents an enormous legislative hurdle, but I thought I'd get it out there. And the other is something that's quite controversial, but nonetheless, when we buy a car, we generally know what we're going to get when we purchase that car. Differential type cars, differential prices. Why not the same with the drugs that we purchase with and for our patients? And lastly, all of this sums up to being an important part, I think, of a system of care, cancer care, that is equitably distributed and affordable because it's defined as being high in value. Thanks, and I apologize for going over a few minutes.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And again, we'll take questions at the end. And we'll move on to our next speaker. Susan Peterson from MD Anderson will speak about distance medicine technology to enhance clinical trial enrollment, participation, and access to care.